The thing that's going to help us, in analyzing the arguments is logic. It's a particular science, and we're going to spend some time studying it, just enough to help us get through what we're learning in philosophy. So now I want to turn to three concepts, the notion of logic, reason, and argument, because I think they're related. And let's be pretty precise. When we're talking about logic, or when I am talking about logic, I'm talking about the science or study of the principles of correct or reliable inference and reasoning. Now, notice I'm talking about the principles of correct or reliable inference and reasoning. We can make a distinction between a prescriptive and a descriptive study. Let's take descriptive first, because we'll contrast prescriptive. When you have a descriptive study, it's a study that describes something. For example, history is a descriptive study, right? It describes what went on in the past. Talk about various things that happened, various trends that happened, what events caused what event. But it's not talking about what happened in the future. It's not making any projections, and it's not telling you what you ought to do. It's describing what exactly happens. By contrast, when we think of something that is a prescriptive study, it's like, think of a prescription. When a doctor gives you a prescription, what is the idea? He's telling you what you ought to do. For example, if you have some kind of sports injury, they might say you go to an orthopedist and he sends you to physical therapy, and he prescribes a certain treatment or way you ought to. He's telling you this is what you should do in order to recover it. So it's prescribing. It's now, many times you don't follow the prescription, right? You don't, or even if it's taking a drug, you don't take it regularly. But the idea is this is what you ought to do. So logic tells you how you ought to reason, what the correct or reliable principles of reasoning are. So it defines how we should reason, and it studies what rules should govern our reasoning, or what the rules of good. Descriptive studies describe how people, in fact, do reason. Now, if we're thinking about reasoning, there is a subject that studies how people do reason. What subject is that? Psychology, right? Oftentimes you spend a lot of time in psychology learning about people who are not rational, and sometimes they say you're not rational, they don't follow the rules of logic. They reason in some odd ways and come to strange conclusions. But that's what psychology is studying, and study of psychology isn't going to help us how to decide how we ought to reason, what the rules of good reasoning are. So just to summarize this one point, logic in this regard is prescriptive. It tells us what is good reasoning, or how we should reason, not how people in fact do reason. I guess occasionally we all follow the laws of logic, and I'm sure occasionally we all do not follow the laws of logic. So let me just summarize a little bit up to this point. When we're talking about reason in this context and in philosophy, we're not talking, reason sometimes means a process, it's a reasoning process. But we're talking about what usually is the end point of that process. As when we're talking about a reason in philosophy, and when we're looking at arguments, we're talking about statements. And when somebody gives you a reason for a certain position or for their conclusion, they're giving you a statement which is supposed to provide support for another statement. So that's what a reason is. Obviously, reason is usually the product of thinking about something, the product of reasoning. But when we're talking about reason, we're talking about statements which are intended to provide support for another statement. and we're going to have a technical term for what we're going to call the reasons when we're looking at those statements. Now, again, to be precise, and we said this at the beginning, when we're talking about an argument, we're not talking about a heated dispute between two people. Rather, in philosophy, we're looking to try to figure out what the truth is. And the way we do that is by considering arguments, which are a set of reasons, that is, a set of statements that are intended to support, provide evidence for, justify, or make rational or reasonable a certain other statement or belief.